Hey, citizens of the new nation, thank you for being here. We really do appreciate it. Before we get started with this video, I want to tell you that I don't make a dime off of YouTube AdSense. So the views, you guys watching this, I don't make money off of that. We started to early on in the beginning, and then YouTube kind of figured out who I was, and they kind of put a stop to that. So really, the only way that I can make money is when you guys interact with our sponsors and our partners. And I'm just glad to say that I have partnered with Aura. You may have heard of them. Aura is an easy-to-use app that includes everything you need to stay safe online, and Aura protects you from scammers and hackers by scanning the so-called dark web, where criminals sell stolen information looking for your emails, passwords, and social security numbers. It alerts you fast, and if it finds anything, they help you fight back against those annoying websites that make your personal information public by automatically requesting your removal of info. This helps to reduce robocalls. Aura gives you near real-time alerts on suspicious credit inquiries, like if someone was opening a loan or credit card in your name. Their VPN allows you to stay anonymous online by keeping your browsing history and personal information safe and encrypted. And they protect your devices from viruses, malware, spyware, and more, so the bad guys cannot break in. Aura even helps you manage what your kids can do on their devices. You can restrict specific apps, set screen limit times, and even set focus times to ensure your child is doing his homework instead of binging on YouTube. And their password manager lets you store and access your online passwords securely and conveniently. Maybe you already have an app that does one of these things, but with Aura, you don't have to download and pay for 7 separate apps. Let Aura do the hard work for you of keeping you safe online, and if you sign up right now, Aura will give you a 2-week free trial with my link. That's right, 2 weeks for free. I can't stress this enough. 14 days for free. You'll be shocked at how much of your private information Aura finds exposed over those 2 weeks. So go to aura.com/doinggreat to start your free trial. Also, it's linked below in the description, and you can hit the QR code. Guys, Aura, 2 free weeks. You don't really get much better than that. You like it, you keep it. You don't like it, so what? Big deal. You help the show out if you work with Aura. I'm telling you, a lot of our viewers have kept Aura. They love Aura. They like the VPN, and they also love getting notifications when their credit information has been, what do you call it? Corrupted?
Leaked.
Stolen. Thanks, Ben. The next partnership and sponsor that I'm going to tell you guys about is about Digital Homestead. I'm sure you've heard me talk about them before, but listen, if you're looking to escape the torrent of toxic and inappropriate content that seems to flood traditional social media platforms where you're never more than a few clicks away from sin, do you wish there was a safer and more private place for your family to connect and share media online? Place that you can feel comfortable inviting grandma to join? Look no further than Digital Homestead, the family-oriented social media platform that prioritizes privacy and security. With Digital Homestead, you have complete control over who sees your profiles and posts, creating a safe and welcoming space for your family to share and connect without the worry of unwanted content. Say goodbye to algorithms designed to keep your eyes glued to the screen, and hello to a new digital home for your family on Digital Homestead. Sign up today at digitalhomestead.app/thenewnation and start connecting for free. Guys, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our next guest. He's known online as Prax Ben. I believe he's a libertarian. So Ben, introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Prax Ben, or you can just call me Ben, of course. Prax Ben is a little bit over the top. I'm with the Foundation for Economic Education, which is a libertarian think tank that focuses on teaching people about Austrian economics and libertarianism. And I've been doing online content for like 3.5 years now. Started off on TikTok, and that's still where I do most of my content, but I've also done YouTube and other platforms. I've done writing a little bit, got my own Substack, and I'm planning on doing a lot more YouTube. I want to do a show, something like this, with a friend of mine where I live, and he also works with the Foundation for Economic Education. And so I'm really looking forward to that and just getting more and more involved with creating content.
How old are you?
22.
Wow. So you're a youngin'.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if you're the youngest guest I've had on the show thus far, encompassing the other show as well. You might be, though, I think. And you are you're not a new Tennessee transplant, but you're kind of like a newer Nashville resident, even though you're not maybe like, city limits Nashville.
Yeah, I've been in Tennessee like 2 years or so, and I just moved near Nashville. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And listen, Bren, because it's Prax. Prax is Latin, isn't it? Is it?
It's praxial. Yeah, I think it is Latin.
Okay. Well, you brought a gift, so if you don't mind, can you show me the gift? Let's see if we can get this in here. So Ben brought me a gift. This is The Church and the Market: A Catholic Defense of the Free Economy. This is by Thomas E. Woods, and you were kind enough to get the book signed for me, right?
Yep.
Let's see. It is inscribed in here. To Mike, all the best. That's amazing. So this is actually going to go into, I think, maybe this bookcase. For right now, we'll put it on top of the Roman Missal. So it'll go on top of there. There it is. Oh, look at that. So Prax Ben, I'm going to call you Prax Ben because I feel like I like it, rolls off the tongue. So I brought you on to talk about libertarianism because as you've seen probably, and as our viewers know, I find libertarianism gay. So I guess I brought you on here to defend it, right?
I suppose so.
Ooh, that's my hat. My hat is in your shot. So what has really drawn you to libertarianism? And can you talk about how, I don't know, does conservatism play a role in libertarianism? Can a conservative also be a libertarian and vice versa? So just maybe, a little bit of, what really attracted you to it.
Yeah, I definitely see your perspective. In fact, I would probably maybe 55% agree with you. I think we agree on a lot, actually. I'm a very socially conservative person. And in my personal opinion, I think libertarianism is the logical conclusion of conservatism. And we can get more into that in a bit. But yeah, I grew up in a very conservative household. My dad was a pastor. My parents were Republicans, pretty standard Republicans, maybe somewhere between paleoconservative and neocon. Not quite as annoying as neocon, not quite as extreme as some paleoconservatives, just your standard conservative Christian family. And I had some disagreements with the GOP. I felt like I was a lot more anti-war. And I felt like the GOP wasn't pro-gun enough for me and pro-liberty enough in certain areas. But there was areas where I was like, well, I feel like weed shouldn't be legalized, right? I mean, weed's dumb, right? And then also I was very, very pro-life, still am.
Yeah.
And I felt like libertarians are pro-choice, right? I mean, that's what you think about libertarians. They're very pro-choice people.
Right.
They had that in the party platform until very recently, where it was actually removed. Where they're no longer explicitly pro-choice, which I was very happy to see them do that.
Oh, okay.
But I started meeting a lot of different libertarians online, and many of them were very socially conservative people. They were Christians, and they're like, yeah, I'm pro-life. And yeah, I don't smoke weed, I don't do drugs, but I believe in legalization. And I was like, that sounds interesting. I want to hear more about that. And the more I learned about it, the more I was like, actually, I feel like these are very nice, wonderful people, very consistent people. They have very good and compassionate arguments for all of these things. And many of them were able to rectify that with their Christian beliefs. And so I just wanted to look more and more into it from there. And then I got into political content making. And I was advocating for Trump back in the 2016. Well, no, that would have been the 2020 election. 2020 election. And I was calling myself a constitutionalist. So I was, pretty conservative, but leaning a bit libertarian. And I was debating all these commies and these Bernie bros, and
tankies.
I wanted, tankies. Most of the tankies came later on.
Okay.
Yeah, now I debate a lot of tankies.
Okay.
But before it was mostly Bernie bros before they transferred into tankies.
Can you define what a tanky is real quick, just so people are like, what the hell is a tanky?
Yeah, so a tanky is a communist. Specifically, they're often Marxist-Leninist or Maoist, and Stalinist. Yeah. So they want a more authoritarian state as a transition into communism.
Okay.
And then of course they love the USSR and Maoist China and modern China and stuff like that.
Would a tanky be like a Christo-fascist born enemy, kind of?
Yeah. Today, some people think you can mix them together.
Really?
The MAGA communists is what they're called.
Oh, interesting.
Very odd people.
Yeah.
Some of them are kind of nice, I guess. I've actually met some of them in person, which is a bit weird because they're a very, very niche group, like conservative communist. But I don't know. That's a conversation for another day, I suppose.
Okay, well, keep talking. I got to fix one of the cameras. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I was advocating for Trump, mostly advocating against Bernie because I thought Bernie was going to be the candidate going against Trump rather than Biden at the time. And I was debating all these Bernie bros. We started talking a lot of economics. And at the time, I just kind of went off of trying to be logical, like thinking about things. I would read some articles and debate them on, minimum wage, Medicare for all. But then I realized I didn't have enough information, so I wanted to read more. And I found Ludwig von Mises, who was an economist. He wrote a lot in the 20s through to the 60s. He was an Austrian economist, and it really resonated with me. Like the logical way he wrote, the very I would say what's the word I'm looking for? Very
inspired, concise,
inspired. Well, I'm trying to passionate. The very passionate way he wrote.
Sure.
And it really resonated with me, and I learned a lot through it. And then from there, I started identifying as a classical liberal.
Oh.
And then I just read more into it. I found people who are much more libertarian. Then I called myself a minarchist, which is someone who wants a night watchman state, a state that only handles courts, military. And then I went all the way and became an anarcho-capitalist. So now I don't believe in a state. And yeah, so we can talk more about that.
Is that where you're at now? You don't believe in a state?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about that, because I guess, I don't know if it's the fundamental issue that I have with libertarians is I almost see them as kind of like moral relativists. Where do they draw their morality from? Because when you take something like drugs, right? Let's say you have a libertarian friend who says, "Oh, okay, well, I personally don't smoke marijuana. I don't think drugs are good for people to do, like let's say like heroin or cocaine. But I believe that people should be able to do them. I believe people should be able to have agencies over their own bodies, and I don't believe the state should step in and tell people what to do, what not to do with their own bodies." Now, as a Catholic, I say that, okay, we should be able to, not allow dangerous drugs into the community and amongst the society. B, we should advocate for people not to do harmful things to their own bodies, where they're either hurting themselves, killing themselves, hurting other people. So we have, I guess, an objective morality that we can draw from and say, this is bad because this is what we believe. This is what, either what God says. So where does a libertarian involve morality in his decisions? Or is a libertarian just saying, okay, I don't want the state to be involved in anything because I am the moral arbiter of what should go on in society? That's kind of where I get confused. And obviously I have trouble verbalizing that, but what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's the big issue with libertarianism, because libertarianism does not have a morality. Mm-hmm. And a lot of libertarians, they completely ignore that. They're just like, okay, we're libertarians and that's it.
Yeah.
They don't have any morality. They're often moral subjectivist, and there's just no real basis of anything. They just become cringe and gay, and it's like you don't really stand for anything. You stand for, oh, I want to do what I want because I want to do it, right? It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
But really you have to do as a libertarian is incorporate some type of morality into your beliefs. Mm-hmm. You have to. Otherwise, you're just going to become a communist anyways. All these libertarians who are moral subjectivists don't actually care about anything. They don't care about society. They don't care about conserving things. They just become communists over time. They stop caring about property rights.
Why do you think that is? It's like, is that like the one domino to communism, the slippery slope to communism, you think, is maybe that sort of anarcho libertarianism?
Well, you know like Chesterton's fence?
I know Chesterton, yeah, but
yeah. Like Chesterton's fence is, you come across a fence in the wilderness, mm-hmm. and it was probably put there for a reason. You don't want to assume like, oh, I can just get rid of this fence. This fence has been maintained over time. It's probably there for a reason.
Right.
It's kind of an argument for conservatism, tradition, and stuff like that. So they're already like against these type of things. They're against tradition. They're against conservatism. They might not care about the nuclear family. Mm-hmm. And property rights is something that is very traditional and conservative. And it came about mostly through Christianity. Christianity built the West. This morality, these understandings of law that we have came out of Christianity. Property rights came out of Christianity. So once they get the idea in their head that they don't care about tradition, they don't care about conserving things, eventually the last dominoes are going to fall. Mm-hmm. Property rights, natural hierarchy, mm-hmm. and then you're a communist because you don't care about any of these things anymore. Those were the last dominoes that they had, the last good foundations that they had, and now they're gone. Mm-hmm. So you have to have a good morality. You have to have conservatism if you're going to be a libertarian. You cannot maintain libertarianism if you don't have objective morality. So I'm a Christian. I have Christian morality. I agree with a lot of the things you said. I believe it's immoral to do drugs because you're harming your body. Mm-hmm. And that is offensive against God, because God created your body. He created you in his image.
Right.
And you're harming yourself. You're harming the body that he gave you, and you should take care of your body. I go to the gym. I take care of my body.
Right.
I try to eat healthy because I recognize that God gave me one body. I need to take care of it. I need to use it to represent God, to represent myself, to represent my beliefs, and to show people, look, I actually care. Right.
So did you see the episode that we did with young Kai Schwemmer? One of them.
I saw some clips of it. I don't believe I watched.
He had made a really good point, because he at one time was a manarchist. I think he self-described one until he came to maybe more conservatism. But he was saying that he thinks that society is like an organism, and this organism, let's say we call our body an organism, and we should treat it as best as we can. We shouldn't allow bad substances into it. We shouldn't allow immorality into it, so that the organism can thrive and survive. So he was saying that the state should do its best and should do its most moral job by allowing that organism to thrive and survive. And he was saying, and I might be butchering the way he was saying this, but it seems like, I can think about this pretty objectively. It seems that when you have a state that is not preoccupied with the health, growth, and let's say ability to thrive of that organism, and it's just kind of like, do whatever you want as long as you're happy and as long as you don't hurt anyone else, that doesn't seem to be a prescription for a long living organism, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I wouldn't quite agree. So I don't know if I would even describe society as an organism, but if you did go in that direction, I would see it as you fundamentally cannot always keep out corruption. You cannot always keep out these bad parts of your organism.
Right.
And sometimes you do need to just chop them off and be separate from them. Okay. I don't want to sound like a segregationist or anything, but fundamentally, I guess the way you can describe it is like ideological segregation. And that's one of the reasons I support like secession. And really like what anarcho-capitalism is all about is decentralization. So you can be separate, like the United States is massive. It's really, really big. It's a really big country.
Very big.
A lot of people, right? People out in California and Oregon are affected by people 2,000 miles away in Washington, D.C. They're being governed by people in Washington, D.C. And same goes for the entire world. People voting in California are affecting us here in our amazing state of Tennessee that's doing awesome things on a state level, on a local level. But we have to deal with, Joe Biden. We have to deal with all these people in Congress, people in the House. It's crazy, right? It would be nice to be able to be separate from these people who are causing us so much anguish and say, look, if you want to totally destroy yourselves over here, do it. I don't care. Right. I think most people in America, even the more centrist people, even the people who aren't voting, most people are pretty conservative.
Yeah, I think so.
But progressives are really loud, and I think one of the big reasons for that is because we have these institutions like the state. The way I see it, I actually see the state as something that's inherently left-wing, inherently progressive. I don't see it as inherently right-wing.
When you say the state, do you mean the federal government, or do you mean the state individually?
Well, I mean the state as in the monopoly on violence over a territory. So in this case, the federal government, again, the United States is a bit complicated. It's not quite the same as many other countries, but the federal government is the main thing we're looking at here.
Right. How about the federal government and its agencies like FBI, ATF, DEA, like things like that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Okay. And about secession, I've always thought that was like, oh, pretty base. Like, certain states should secede and be apart from like the North and West, the North and Western states, or the East Coast versus the West Coast states. We all know how pretty leftist they are. But would seceding ultimately open up whatever new countries are formed into, would they be open to like border wars and invasion constantly? Like, does that make any sense? Because I feel like, let's say the southern states secede. I feel like the federal government as it would exist wouldn't allow those states to succeed, but B, if they ever had any problems, they're just like, okay, we're going to go in militarily and try to take this over. Do you see that happening now in a modern sense, or no? Well, Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. I think over time we've definitely become less violent in terms of state conflict for the most part, like humanity itself. I think there's certain times you could point to, like, of course we had the Civil War, right? I think there's certain times you can point to where these types of things definitely were much more prone to end in violence.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely less likely overall today, but also it matters, you know, how you go about things. And this again goes back to morality. You have to have a good foundation. If you're just seceding for the sake of seceding, you're like, oh, I just want liberty. You're not really caring about anything.
Right.
Libertarianism, again, does not have morality, and it also doesn't have strategy. It's really just a legal theory, and it's you know, it's got a critique of power in there. Right. You have to have other things along with libertarianism. So if you have morality, you have a strategy, then you can do things correctly. You can work with other people. If you have empathy with other people, right? So there's definitely good ways to do it.
That doesn't sound like libertarianism anymore, though. That sounds like something totally different, and maybe a new name should be created. Maybe. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair. Fair. What else? Okay. So let's talk about libertarianism when it comes to economics. Again, I'm not an expert. I wouldn't even call myself probably even worthy of speaking on it. But let's take something like capitalism. How much capitalism do you want? And are you sort of agreeable with a capitalism that is too much focused on more profit and greed? If that makes any sense.
I want all the capitalism. As far as greed goes, I'm not a cringe objectivist. He's like, oh, greed's good, egoism, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Again, I'm a Christian. I feel like the individual for the sake of the individual thing is really cringe. Yeah. I definitely care about society and the good of society. But the way I see capitalism and economics, so economics I would define as the study of human action. So you're looking at the way humans interact with each other, specifically in this context, you know, how we handle capital goods, how we produce things, how we allocate the final goods that we create and stuff like that. And I think, you know, as like a business owner, for example, you should be acting morally. You shouldn't just be concerned all about yourself. But I also think that it might be an issue if you try to force that on everyone else. And you might create boomerang effects. I think that's one of the biggest issues with like using with like forcing social conservatism on people is boomerang effects, because a lot of people, they just don't really want to listen to you. You try to impose certain things and then it backfires. Yeah. And one of my big issues with paleoconservatives often is that they use a very consequentialist morality. Like it's more so implicitly. Like they're definitely not explicitly
what would be like a good example of that?
So like, oh, we're banning drugs because that's going to reduce the amount of people doing drugs. And it's like, well, but what about the action itself? Is that moral? And that's what I want to focus on, is the action itself. I do care about the consequences for sure. Right. And, you know, I'll talk to them about the consequences, but I feel like we should be looking at the specific actions taken and how you actually achieve those actions.
So you're talking about like the actual banning of drugs and how is that moral?
And how you actually can achieve that.
Do the ends justify the means is that kind of an argument for that?
Yeah, so I'm saying the ends don't justify the means. If we're using like an objective morality or a Christian morality, then we don't have that.
I see.
Right?
Okay, so you're talking about like the ends would be all drugs are eliminated. The means would be physically and violently eliminating drug dealers and drugs from the society.
Yeah, and then it's like, well, and then how do you even do that? You have to create these institutions, like, you know, we have the FBI, we have the DEA, we have the ATF, all these institutions which harm other people as well.
Right. Collateral damage,
kill people's dogs all the time.
And unintended consequences, basically. Okay, I understand that. I see that. I think, God, I wonder if it's weird. Oh, another camera went down. Jeez, this is not doing good. But the wide one's still on, and that's fine. But yeah, I'm wondering if both libertarianism and conservatism as it exists now is kind of just like a pipe dream. Like we can say all these things, but it's just anytime we try to enforce them, they have led to bad outcomes, like the DEA, like all these federal agencies and stuff like that. Can libertarianism fix that? Because I would assume that libertarian would be like, all right, we're eliminating all these agencies, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, the biggest problem with libertarianism in the past has definitely been, like I said, strategy and morality. And it's actually been similar with conservatism, honestly. You know, we had Reagan, we had the Bushes, we had the, you know, conservatives who did a lot of things that really didn't help. And yeah, kind of reminds me of Michael Knowles. I saw him on Tim Pool's podcast.
Yeah.
And he was saying, oh, we're in the situation we're in now because of libertarianism, because the conservatives were following the libertarians and we were getting rid of big government. And then I look at that as a libertarian. I'm like, when? I didn't see that. In fact, I just saw the government growing and growing and growing. I saw, you know, Reagan increasing the budget of many of these institutions. I saw conservatives getting behind the Patriot Act and getting behind the intelligence community and all these things, which are now being turned against us. They're being turned against Catholics. They're being turned against Christians just because they're Catholics and Christians and conservatives, right? So I see it as the exact opposite. I see it as, you know, it was conservatives ignoring the libertarians, which, you know, in the 80s, in the 90s, that's when all of the conservative libertarians were coming out. That's when you had Rothbard, who's a paleo libertarian, and that's someone that I follow in the steps of. And they're like, no, don't go for the Patriot Act, don't go for all these things, don't get behind these intelligence agencies.
Kind of like the Rand Pauls, right? Kind of. Okay,
yeah,
interesting.
Ron Paul.
Yeah. I do agree with that point. That I wouldn't agree that, you know, we were making government smaller. That makes sense. Yeah, I don't see that at all. Just saying that was Trump in a way, did he expand government for the 4 years that he was in? And do you think that if he runs and wins again that he would continue to do so?
I would say Trump definitely did. It was definitely to a much lesser extent than Biden, and it was largely after COVID.
Right.
So that's, I wouldn't be fair there. And of course, you know, the president isn't behind everything. No. You have to deal with everyone else in the government. Yeah. So I do want to be fair with Trump. I definitely think he could have done a lot better for sure. And I think you would agree there too. Yeah. I would take Trump again over Biden for sure, over probably any Democrat, maybe with the exception of Robert Kennedy, but I don't know enough about Robert Kennedy to really defend that. Right. Yeah. But I would probably prefer Ron DeSantis over Trump though. I feel like he has a much better foundation and he has a much better morality, and he's demonstrated that in his personal life and in his politics. Okay. Oh, we have a question from an Instagram user who wanted to ask you about DeSantis, but we'll save that for a little bit later. So what else do you try to, I guess, explain? What other topics do you try to go over when you are making online content? Like what is an issue that you think that you could probably pull people a lot closer to you a lot easier if they actually were able to just kind of sit and think about it for a second? Well, I mostly focus on economics, of course. I try to talk a lot about socialism. I focus on socialist a lot because I feel like that's a growing issue. And as I'm talking about that, I'm also sharing, you know, capitalist economics, and that goes out to the conservatives who aren't completely sold on capitalist economics as well. So it's kind of a win-win. You know, I'm targeting a lot of different people, but I also talk about different social issues. You know, I've been talking a lot about city bike Karen and stuff like that lately. Because I feel like we have to really speak up about things like that. We don't want to get to a society where you can be victimized by a crime and then punished by the mob because you're white. It's like, it's actually almost unthinkable that something like that just happened, you know? But yeah, I talk about abortion, but yeah, if it's like an issue I can really sit down with somebody, it's probably mostly going to be centered around economics. And I think I can push a lot of conservatives a lot more libertarian if I'm able to sit down and talk to them about it. Is it tougher though to try and really pull people in with economics, because it's such like, it's such a broad but really intense topic to talk about, just because it's so like, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's clearly there's just way too much to learn. There's way too much to read. There's different forms of economics. So I'm wondering, like, if it's easier to pull people in with social issues rather than economic issues. I mean, that's clearly the case. To bring up an example, I had Jimmy Dore on the show last week, and he talked about, I asked him, how are you with Medicaid for all or Medicare for all after seeing how the government handled COVID? And his contention was, I just want to take a capitalist out of, let's say, an interaction between me and my doctor.
because he goes on to talk about, if I go to the doctor, then I have to deal with these people who are running the insurance companies, and then I have to talk to people who don't really even necessarily know about me personally or know me physically. They have to consult some other doctor who then makes a decision, and then that gets back to the other doctor, and then either I get treated or I don't get treated or I have to go somewhere else. So would you see that as, do you want more capitalists in the healthcare system, or I assume you don't want less? So if you were responding to Jimmy Dore, and let's say I asked you, Ben, can you explain to Jimmy how you see us moving ahead with a libertarian view on healthcare economics?
Yeah. And this actually kind of ties back into like the whole conservatism, libertarianism thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I would kind of go back. I would rewind a little bit. Democracy in America, Alexis de Tocqueville.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he wrote about all the way back in the 1850s. When he went to America, he saw voluntary institutions. So these little tight-knit institutions and communities, largely religious based, but it's sometimes just based on geography or just some other thing that ties people together. Yeah. People came together and they helped each other out in health issues, in financial issues, and all sorts of things. And that's really important, right? So like libertarians, we care much more about the pre-political institutions than the state. We care much more about the family, or we should. We care much more about the family, the church, community, and things like that, because that's obviously much better than being dependent on a bureaucrat.
Right.
That's where you're going to get the bad type of individualism, where you're separate from everybody else, and you're not even independent. You don't even have that aspect because the state's supporting you, and that doesn't help anybody. That destroys society. Right. So Alexis de Tocqueville, he wrote about that. And those institutions just expanded from there. A great historian, David Beto, he wrote a lot about these institutions in the early 1900s. They started medical lodges, which meant that you had a community and they would hire a doctor, pay him a yearly salary, and then he'd come in, and then each person in the community would pay a certain amount per year. Right. So it would be like literally a day's wage per year, which is crazy to be covered by a doctor for a day's wage per year. We dream of having that today, At the time, the big healthcare problem was that it was too cheap. That's what a lot of people were complaining about. And by a lot of people, I mean corrupt bureaucrats and stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah. They wanted a piece of the pie.
Yeah. Okay. It was too cheap. And, today we're like, oh, it's too expensive. It's capitalism. When it was entirely a capitalist system, it was too cheap. Right. People had so much access to healthcare. And of course, it's 100 years ago. Healthcare wasn't as good, sure. Right. But you had more access to what existed.
Yeah. And I assume people's diets were completely different. The type of food that they ate was completely different. So not everybody was as unhealthy as they are today.
Yeah, or at least in different ways.
Right, exactly. Okay. Yeah, interesting.
You have obesity problems and stuff like that today.
Keep going.
Yeah, so you had all these institutions, and this helped society so much. Like Bowling Alone, Putnam, I know Kai Schwimmer loves that book. And so he talks about, a lot of these tight-knit communities and clubs and the decline of them, and how you saw like really huge declines in American society over the past several decades, as you saw people getting out of, all sorts of different social groups. Right. And becoming, more focused on it, focused on the nuclear family in a bad way, where it's like just the family. Like that's kind of what happened first, right?
Right, and detaching itself from the extended family. I mean, that's something that Malcolm Gladwell talked about in what was his book? I think it's right. It was The Outliers, where he talked about that one Italian community in Pennsylvania who never. So there was, just to rewind, there was I believe, like a home visiting doctor, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, you'd have a doctor who would come to your home and visit you. So he had his practice in this one area of Pennsylvania. And for I think like over 10 years or 20 years during his practice, he wondered why he never got called to a specific area. So he would just always avoid this one little town. So he went one day and he found that basically this whole town in Italy just one day got up and moved to Pennsylvania. And this town had not only the nuclear family, but it had generations of families living with each other. They were highly sociable. They smoked cigars. They drank wine all together. They stayed out late and, socialized on their blocks. And this doctor had never visited anybody in that community for heart disease, for weight problems, for really any sort of problem. So that goes back to when you're talking about how these communities would at least spend more time with each other, really care about what's going on with each person inside that community. And I feel like now, with the exception of some maybe congregations within churches, because I know that there are some congregations that have bought health insurance as a group, so they're able to split costs amongst themselves. That seems like it could be, I guess, a way of the future where groups can get together, buy health insurance at a price where they see it as fair, and really work within that network themselves rather than having to buy health insurance on the public market. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, we still have what we call fraternal benefit societies and stuff like that. But they decline for two different reasons. And so that works perfectly because we were just talking about the decline.
Yeah.
So, of course, you had a lot of tight-knit communities in various ways, religious communities, all sorts of things. And then the extended family, that declined into just the nuclear family.
Right.
And then that declined into now we're trying to get rid of the nuclear family, of course. It was no coincidence that the push into just the nuclear family, getting rid of the extended family, the suburban archetype came after the Great Depression, after we introduced the welfare state via the New Deal. And started regulating these fraternal societies, these medical lodges and stuff like that. So the government started implementing various policies that made it much harder for them to offer all of these different coverage types, got rid of the unemployment insurance and stuff like that, all sorts of things that really helped people before and during the Great Depression. Right. And then, of course, then you had Social Security, which that was a big issue because, prior to that, people had their own pensions. And also, you raise your kids to take care of you when you're older.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So all these different things just kind of culminated into the decline of the extended family, the decline of communities. Then you have the nuclear family, and then you get into the Great Society. And that's where everything really went to crap.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't see that as like let's say as we talk about this organism, I know you don't really like referring to society as an organism, but it goes back to the morality of the people who are in charge. The people who are in charge project as if they do have a morality, as if they have good morals. But going back to, let's say, these health lodges and things like that, if I'm a leader, especially if I'm a leader within a community, I see that as a net good. Why would I want to stop that? The problem is that there's another human being who doesn't see that as a good and who has to get involved and then who has to bring the state into it and just really confuse everything in order for his own personal benefit. So I don't know if there's really any way that, because I feel like we're so idealistic when we talk about things as conservatives or libertarians that we almost forget about the human element behind, I guess, just people in general. Like, we really wish for moral leaders, but will we ever get them? Like that's the thing. I don't know. One libertarian who I really liked was Larry Sharpe when he was running for governor of New York. Do you remember Larry Sharpe?
Yeah, I've met Larry.
Yeah. How is he? Good libertarian? Is he he seems like he would be socially conservative?
He seems like he has a good head on his shoulders. I don't know if I could call him a conservative. I just don't know him enough.
But libertarian.
To know that. But yeah, he's a great libertarian, great guy.
Yeah, what do we do to fix that? The only way to fix that would just be to fix human beings, but you can't really adjust anyone's moral compass by the way yours is, right? Like, what can you do?
Yeah, as someone who calls myself both a libertarian and an anarchist, I often hear the argument oh well, you people believe everyone are good and rational, completely rational and good people. It's well, no, we still recognize that people want to, hurt you, rape you, and murder you, but we just don't want those types of people to be able to have access to such large amounts of power. So I've been saying state, right? Not government. I distinguish between the state and the government. Okay. So government just is any sort of hierarchy over a given institution, for example. So you have government in churches. You have government in the Catholic Church in various ways, right? You have a whole hierarchy. That's great. I love that. It's voluntary hierarchy. It works perfectly. People go to be part of the Catholic Church, and when they do that, you have to go with the rules of the Catholic Church. You have to go with the rules of the hierarchy. Right. But you can also leave at any time if you're not willing to abide by those rules, or they can kick you out if you don't abide by those rules. Right. And there's all sorts of governments. Families have government. You can have community governments, all sorts of governments to make important decisions. And that's good, because if you have a government that runs on actual natural hierarchy, then you will have at least for the most part, good moral people actually rising to the top. The problem is when you introduce the state and you have the monopoly on power, you have this massive amount of power that people can seize. And earlier I said, I don't believe the state is inherently right-wing. And that kind of goes back to, people often misattribute it to Robert Conquest, but the first law of politics, I forget who actually introduced it, but it wasn't Robert Conquest. The first law of politics, institutions that aren't inherently right-wing will eventually become left-wing.
Okay.
And I believe the family is inherently right-wing. I believe the church is inherently right-wing, and all sorts of institutions are like that are inherently right-wing. I don't believe the state is, because the state has to run on, for example, taxes, right? It has to go and seize people's money instead of, going through voluntary payments, disrespecting private property rights, which are a traditional, fundamental institution of human society. And, imposing its will on people rather than having these voluntary relationships. Not only that, but the state replaces these right-wing institutions, these traditional institutions. It replaces, like we were just talking about, the extended family, the communities with the welfare state. It replaces the church in teaching morality, public schools, and all sorts of things like that. So that's why I see the state as inherently left-wing. And thus, if the state is not inherently right-wing, then it will always become left-wing. So I think fundamentally, you have to either significantly reduce the power of the state, which you can do that two different ways. One is just, getting rid of many of the state's own institutions. We used to have a much smaller state, even though America was still always, for the most part, always really big.
Right.
Or you just have a lot more states. So like, for example, you have thousands of countries instead of, I don't know how many countries we have, 150, 200, I don't know.
Right.
Something like
over
that.
200. Yeah. In the world.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, what do you know about pre-federalism? Each colony, each state had its own set of laws, correct? Like they weren't obviously federally regulated or federally overseen. Would you see that as a benefit if we went back to that now? Because still, all states have their own constitutions, but they're still overseen and regulated by the federal government. So is there a way to get back to that pre-federalization? Or, because I don't really know, and I'm not really too much educated on this, but I don't really know if federalism was a good thing or if federalism was intended as it is now. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you know what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, I think federalism, when you had more power in the state's hands, that's definitely a good thing. But I feel like we saw that it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough, right? Like the same way we saw classical liberalism wasn't enough. We started out as a pretty classical liberal country.
Well, at least to defend itself as far as like its foreign policy. Like if you have a bunch of like sort of like unattached states, it probably doesn't suit you as a superpower when you're trying to, have some sort of foreign policy or foreign agenda, right?
Yeah, the way I think that's mostly a good thing because we're probably both anti-war, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you don't really have.
Well, it would depend.
Like
it would depend on who we're warring against.
Yeah. We're not warmongers.
Right. No. I'm not like Jimmy Dore would call Bernie Sanders a war pig. So yeah, not a war pig, definitely for sure. Okay.
Yeah, I think it works out in that way, and I feel like I definitely think a more decentralized system is much better for national defense. And so I think the big mistake a lot of people make, and I prefer secession over federalism, is that they think if we're gonna secede, then we have to be on bad grounds with everybody else. It's like, well, let's say okay, it's pretty unrealistic. Let's say all 50 states tomorrow become countries, right? All 50 states are countries. I don't think we should be like, screw you, California, we're sanctioning you, blah blah. We California is a pretty big economy. We should still have free trade. I'm very big advocate of free trade. We should still have free trade with these countries, and free trade is really great. Countries that are trading with each other don't go to war with each other as much.
Usually, yeah.
So that's really important. Trade with each other. Have a good amount of immigration available. You don't have to have complete free immigration for people from keep the commies out. Allow people to immigrate from California. We already have that to some extent, of course.
Oh yeah,
right?
okay. You can be super selective. Yeah. Though I do see if that were to happen, I would assume Tennessee, Kentucky, Florida, Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, North Carolina, South Carolina would immediately form like a NATO kind of, right? Like, wouldn't that make sense?
I think I'm not exactly pro NATO, but I feel like definitely the idea if you have a weaker
treaty
state
amongst
having
like
treaties,
right? Exactly, yeah. Amongst
like,
states who
we have to stay safe, of course.
Right? Yeah.
There's a country in Europe, Liechtenstein, very small country,
yeah.
like 60,000 people or something. They can't defend themselves against anything, but they're not being invaded,
right?
And because they have allies who are going to protect them, and their allies are surrounding them. There's no one really there to invade them,
right?
They have complete free trade, because if they implemented tariffs and all this stuff, they would starve to death because they don't have enough land or resources to do anything, right? And I think we should have a Europe and an America of 1,000 Liechtensteins. I love the Liechtenstein model, right?
Clearly.
Like even if we have kings and everything, I'm all for that. Let's have princes, 1,000 Liechtensteins and 1,000 princes.
Wait, so are you like a monarchist kind of?
I wouldn't. I don't.
Because you can't. Because you're an anarchist.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about anarchy before we get into questions, because I am lost on what a true anarchist is. And I know they're anarcho-communists, they're anarcho-capitalists, right? So what, as brief as we can do it, just because I don't want to spend the whole show talking about anarchy. It's not like I have Michael Malice on or anything like that. But what is an anarchist in its purest form?
So an anarchist in its purest form wants to abolish the state. They don't want any state. So like when I say, I would love a Europe or an America of 1,000 Liechtensteins, that would still be 1,000 states. I just think if we're going to have a state, that's the best alternative. I don't want that quite. Something close to that would be anarchy, but you still wouldn't have 1,000 states. You just wouldn't have any states, but you'd still have, like I was talking about, different government institutions that are voluntary. Right. So an anarchist wants all human interactions to be voluntary, unless of course you're engaging in something involuntary. You come in and you're forcing somebody with a gun, then yet you can use force against that person. Okay. Because they've already demonstrated that they're not willing to abide by the rules of society. They're not willing to respect someone else's rights. So now their rights are completely mute, at least to the extent that they're violating someone else's rights. So that's what an anarchist wants. They want a voluntary society. They want people to engage in voluntary interactions and not have a monopoly on force over society.
Okay, I gotcha. Who makes decisions in an anarchist community?
So that's the thing, right? So if it's an anarchist community and there's no monopoly on violence, communities can decide that in different ways. So there's a few things we can theorize, but I think what's more solid with a lot of people and what resonates with a lot more people is real solid examples. So a really great example. Okay, so my mother is Cajun French. Okay. Right? She came from Louisiana. So, she came from the Acadians, who came from France. They settled in Nova Scotia. So the Acadians were like a whole Catholic community, thousands and thousands of people, about 20,000 people altogether in what we would call Acadia. Okay. So they settled in Acadia. Initially, they had different governors. They had different states, and then they ended up warring with each other. Okay. After the Civil War, in about 1655, they decided, all right, we're done with this. Let's just not do that. Let's just live without these states imposing their will on us, and we're just going to be a stateless society. And they were like that for 100 years until 1755, when the British came in and wiped out 50% of them. But so you no longer have a state, you don't have taxes, you don't have anything like that, but you have this tight-knit community with very homogenous ideas. Again, like all of them are Catholic. They also lived by the Mi'kmaq Indians, and they incorporate the Mi'kmaq Indians into their faith. Okay. But while also respecting the Mi'kmaq Indians' property rights, they didn't go and conquer them. They were trading with them. Eventually, as many of the Mi'kmaq were converting to Catholicism, they were intermarrying with each other. And that was a great society. And the way they made decisions in some ways was when you had a very large decision that would affect everybody, you'd use democracy, which I am against democracy.
That's what I'm just about to ask.
Yeah. I'm against democracy. I'm not against using democracy, if that makes sense. So big D democracy, that's what I'm against. Okay. A state democracy. You're voting for the person who's going to be in charge or anything and wield that monopoly of violence. I'm not against if my friends get together, hey, let's vote on if we want pizza or Yeah.
Right.
That's
You'd be
great.
against some voted in voted in by the mob guy coming in and saying, no, you guys aren't having pizza. Actually, you're
Exactly.
having Chinese food.
Yeah. Yeah. I would prefer monarchy over democracy.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
If we had a state.
Interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Cool. Because we all know that a monarchist would allow you to have pizza.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So anarchy. Do you see anarchism? It obviously can't exist in this system right now. Like it obviously can't exist in an American republic or an American democracy, like they like to call it, right? Like that would have to be totally abolished before any sort of anarchism could work, right?
Yeah. Well, at least we'd at least have to see a lot of change. So like Acadia, technically they were under the territory of, well, it changed initially
ruled
France
by the French,
and then
right?
England.
Okay.
And they had, their own rules, but they really just didn't enforce. They didn't really care.
Okay.
So, they had like taxes that you're like, oh, you're supposed to pay these. The Acadians were just like, we're not going to pay them. The French government didn't really care. Then eventually you had the British government. They didn't really care for the most part until some guys decided, no, these Acadians are getting a little bit too,
Ornery.
Successful.
Yeah,
they're
sure.
getting a little bit, they're Catholics, they're French people. Ugh, we don't like any of that. They're being nice with the Native Americans. Like, oh man, gross. And then, that's why I hate British people, even though outside of my Acadian blood, I'm like 50%
I'm going to
British.
kill these dogs. Sorry. It's just I don't know if the mics will pick that up, but it's like I was watching this one podcast where it's a very successful podcast, but a lot of the time the host will voice all the problems going on in the podcast, like, oh, this went out, and a lot of people in the comments are just like, hey, if you didn't say anything, I wouldn't have known. So I don't even know if these mics can really even pick up those footsteps, but you hear them and I hear them and they're driving me insane for a second. So sorry.
I would just leave all that out.
I'm not going to edit it. I'm going to leave it in. No, I'm going to leave it in there just so that people know eventually, like, okay, if Mike's looking around, he probably hears his dog's footsteps. Now, obviously,
just be transparent about it.
Well, yeah, I haven't said anything yet, but this is my home office now, and this is the new base of the show for the foreseeable future. I was like, that's not going to last. Yeah, you're probably right. Let's ask you some questions from Instagram. And I believe there's 6 of them here. We probably talked a little bit about some of this. Well, someone wanted to know, and you told me this earlier, Marco Hernandez, what denomination is he?
Baptist.
Okay. But can you expand on that a little bit more? Because there are a bunch of different even, denominations within Baptist churches. So I know that there's like the Southern Baptists and then there are like Baptists. So which one are you?
I'm like anarchist Baptist. Yeah.
Really?
We don't got the conventions and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. That's actually one thing that really resonated with me with anarchism, because I grew up in independent Baptist churches, and I was all like, we're worried about if you have like this very, which of course you're going to disagree with that. If you have like this hierarchical church structure, prone to corruption, whereas if just one church corrupts, it's just confined to that whole thing. So like,
we'll just corrupt our whole congregation. Yeah. No need for it to spread. Like, that's fine. Okay.
So that really resonated with me because I heard like the pro decentralization arguments my whole life in the context of, religion.
Right. Okay.
So
do you get drawn to Catholicism at all? Because like you seem like someone who would be a fan of Catholicism.
I definitely like, first of all, I really like that Catholics and Eastern
I got you.
Eastern Orthodox really care about like aesthetics and beauty and stuff like that, which you don't really find that much in Protestantism or Baptists. Yeah. And I really like that. I really love beautiful churches and beautiful art and stuff.
Okay.
I'm definitely like, I'm not any sort of like extreme idealist full of myself. Like, I don't know, I got everything right. So I'm definitely like always open and willing to, read into stuff. I recently picked up a book by Ware, his last name is Ware. It's on Eastern Orthodoxy, and I was gonna read into that.
Well, hey, you brought me a book. Maybe I can give you a book. Where is this book? I saw you looking at my bookcase earlier. Where is it? So I have a book on orthodoxy. It might be over there. It is over there. I'll let you walk away with that one. You could borrow that. You could read it. Someone gave it to me, and I haven't opened it yet. So I figured maybe you'd at least probably read it, I think. You're a big reader. You're a big reader. I saw one of your Instagram posts when you were moving. I saw all the books that you were reading. Okay, this is from Right Wingism app. How can libertarianism truly address culture How can libertarianism truly address culture war we are currently facing in America?
Libertarianism can't, because libertarianism isn't about culture, of course. Like we already covered that. So that's why libertarians have to actually engage in culture. Libertarians have to have morality and actually care about society. You know, like you've seen the meme, the big fat, fedora.
Yes.
Oh, how does
Milady.
the well-being of society at all affect me? You know, that sort of thing. Like, nah, we shouldn't be like that. Libertarians should really care about society. And I feel like I really we didn't talk about this too much per se. It sort of ties into the whole like welfare type thing we were going over in healthcare. But I feel like economics definitely gives us a lot of answers, though. So I think libertarians definitely do have an advantage in that they study economics probably more than most people. And if they're doing it the right way, which in my opinion, Austrian economics, then they understand human behavior in very good ways that really helps guide you in these social problems. So, like I was talking about, consequentialism and whatnot, and worrying about, the effects of this, like the unseen, you even said it, you said like, the unseen consequences, which is exactly it. Henry Hazlitt wrote a book called Economics in One Lesson, which actually this goes all the way back to Frederick Bastiat, but the one lesson in Economics in One Lesson is the unseen consequences of things. So he talks about minimum wage and unions, and it's like, people focus so much on the direct consequences of a specific policy and don't really focus on like all the consequences that have to happen for that policy to take place.
Okay.
And I could give a really quick example. The really main example is the broken window fallacy. And this is a fallacy that's used all over the place. It's mostly used in the context of wartime prosperity. Oh, this war is great for the economy type thing. This guy's got a shop. He's a tailor. His son throws a rock through the window, breaks the window. A crowd gathers around. Oh, the window's broken. And then they start, thinking amongst themselves, talking amongst themselves, kind of becoming little philosophers. Like, well, actually, I think it's a good thing for the community that the window is broken, because now the guy who puts in windows has a job to do.
Right.
He can come in. He's going to get paid, right? But then what they don't consider is now, since the tailor has to pay for his window to be broken, he was actually going to go buy more materials to get a really special suit made for a friend of his as a surprise. And, his friend was going to go to a party with his brand new suit. And, or you could go a lot of different directions. That money he had to spend for the window could have been used for something else, right? He could have bought himself some new shoes or whatever. And then the shoemaker would have gotten the money, right? So they're not considering like, that money would have been used for something. It's not just sitting there doing nothing, or the time, all this stuff, right? There's all these unseen consequences, and it's really like inconceivable. It's like the multiverse type things. It goes branch off. Every decision you make branch off, and a lot of different things happen. A lot of people don't really consider that.
Okay, the broken window fallacy. I like that. Look it up. Okay, let's go to, this is Dick Cheney Carpet Bomb. He's a funny Instagram account. I don't know if he follows you. Was 9/11 an inside job? Hint, hint, it was. I did it.
Dick Cheney did it?
Yeah.
I would say, okay, I as far as 9/11 goes, I'm sort of like in the middle. I feel like there's a lot of stupid conspiracy theories around 9/11.
Sure, yeah.
There's a really great YouTuber. His name is Miles Power. He has great videos on 9/11, on Sandy Hook, and all sorts of things like that. He looks at right-wing and left-wing conspiracies, and he really like does these great deep dives into them. I absolutely love him. He has really great videos on 9/11, like I said. And I'm like, okay, yeah, the whole controlled demolition things, that doesn't really hold up. A lot of these arguments don't really hold up. Like planes, definitely, it was a friggin' missile. Planes hit. There was, these terrorists behind it. Now, do I think there's a possibility that the U.S. government knew that was going to happen and didn't prevent it or pushed it? Yeah. For sure. There's a strong possibility that that's the case.
Yeah, maybe like is inside job like too inflammatory? Is maybe PSYOP worked better or something like that?
Yeah, PSYOP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Ben Yaffe, this is a member of the men's group. You should join it. Why do so many right-wing lulberts love DeSantis when he's passed literal hate speech laws?
Well, because, like sort of what we talked about is like the misrepresentation of libertarians, either from people who aren't libertarians or from terrible libertarians.
Yeah.
A lot of libertarians who actually care about culture issues, I've noticed, and conservative libertarians, Christian libertarians, I've noticed a lot of them really do like DeSantis because he's very real, a very, very real person.
What do you mean when you say real? He just communicates more as your next door neighbor or something like that. He's more relatable as far as like more real or more relatable.
He's doing what he actually believes in.
Okay.
And he has a lot of good beliefs.
Okay.
He's a Christian. He's a family man. Stuff like that. That's one big problem I have with Trump. I feel like Trump's personal life has been very, not something that I like to see in any sort of anybody.
Right.
But
would I call him necessarily a moral person? Probably not. I mean, I don't know. But then it gets into how does he run the country? Does he run the country with the correct morals, or at least I don't know. That's where it gets very muddy, and that's where I feel like I kind of disconnect with American politics, where it's just like none of these people are moral as far as like what the church teaches. So it's just how do you support someone like this? Do you see someone like DeSantis who is more of a moral person than Trump, like you just said? He's more of a family person. I see
DeSantis as like in our current political climate as a net positive for sure. I think he's been very good for Florida, and he's been very inspirational for a lot of places. I think Tennessee is doing a lot of good things. It goes a lot more under the radar compared to Florida, but we have politicians here doing a lot of great things. You got who's our governor? Bill Lee. Yep. You got Glenn Jacobs, Knox County mayor. He's actually an anarchist.
Okay.
He's got pretty much the same beliefs as I do, and he's Kane, the wrestler.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
He's in Knoxville, or is he in Knox County?
Knox County.
How far away is that?
Knox County's 2 hours away.
Should I get him on the show? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. For sure.
He's an actual anarchist.
I mean,
like he labels
I don't know
himself.
if he's going to fit in here, honestly.
Well, yeah, no, I'd probably go to him. Yeah. Okay. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. He's a Rothbardian anarchist. He said that he doesn't believe anarchy will happen in his lifetime, but that's his belief.
Okay.
And I probably agree with that.
Oh, really? Interesting. Yeah. Okay. This is from Matt Lopez. How do you reconcile, quote, live and let live with your culture and society crumbling around you?
I would never say live and let live.
No?
Yeah. I would never
Is
say
that a common misconception that people have of libertarians? Oh, live and let live. No.
Well, that's one we can't really say is a misconception because a lot of libertarians say that. It's a stupid belief. Live and let live. Like, I don't believe in state coercion. I do believe in social coercion and economic coercion.
Okay.
So Hans Hermann Hoppe, you may have heard of Hans Hermann Hoppe, a very famous paleo libertarian, very, very known. The whole like Liechtenstein thing I'm talking about, the monarchy, that comes from Hoppe.
Okay.
He wrote a book called Democracy, That God That Failed, which was like a huge major libertarian critique of democracy. Okay. Very controversial amongst the lulberts, we'll call them, the libertines. Where was I going with this? Live and let live.
Yes.
So he talks a lot about physical removal or ostracization. Okay. The sort of the helicopter meme. I don't know if you've seen that, throwing the commies out of helicopters, physically removing them. That came from Hoppe, where they kind of incorporated his physical removal with Pinochet's helicopters. Right. But physical removal really means like social ostracization and economic coercion. Gotcha. So basically, like, in our community, if we have a guy if we want to have like our community, we're like social conservatives, and we're like, we're with our families, our extended families, we're just vibing. And then we got some guy who moves in down the street, and he's like going out in his yard, smoking weed, playing his rap music. And we're like, we don't really like that guy.
Our HOA, so to say.
You're not going to come on our property. We're not going to speak to you. We're not even going to look at you. You can't come into our shops. Can't come into our stores. You can't come into any of that stuff, right? And I believe this is much more effective than state coercion, right? Actually, but like that's one of the reasons the state has tried so hard to stop people from doing these things. Okay, Civil Rights Act. You can't ban people you don't like from your store, and which I don't think you should ban someone based on their race. But
it's bad business. But if you want to discriminate, you should be allowed to discriminate
for sure. Yeah. But like I said earlier, like
this guy would move out of our little community because why would he want to live there? Yeah.
He can't go to any shops. He can't do anything. Yeah. He's just going to move away.
I like that. What is that called? What is it called?
Physical removal.
Physical removal. Yeah. Not necessarily like physical. But yeah, I like that. Okay, I get that. Cool. Last question. This is from D. Peters 2012. Does the state have no obligation to teach morals?
Does the state have no obligation? I don't trust the state to teach morals.
Yeah.
I mentioned that earlier. Like when the state's teaching morals, which again is primarily done through schools. Because I mean, where else do you do it? You can go up and say like, this is my morals in your speech or whatever.
Sure.
But really the only way it can be done is schools, unless you add something else. I don't trust the state to teach morals. I don't think the state has ever really, at least our state has ever really taught good morals per se.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think it goes back to is, again, who is teaching those morals? Who is the moral person behind that, right?
The state's assigning people to teach it.
Exactly.
And what we've seen is that public schools have been a major institution for teaching bad morals. Like that's really what a lot of progressives targeted, because it's right there. It's perfect, right? Like you forcing kids to go to school, compulsory schooling. Yeah. It's right there, you know?
So, but as a libertarian, you wouldn't even necessarily support the public school system anyway. If you got in, if you could do whatever you want, you abolish it. And that way you're able to allow people to sort of run their own school systems. You would probably eliminate school boards along with
Whenever we talk
that.
about abolishing public school or school choice, people are like, oh, what if they send their kids to a Christian school? It's like, yeah, that's the point.
That's the point, right?
That's the point.
Exactly. I wouldn't even necessarily have, but this comes with physical removal. I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with people sending their kids to communist training camps, you know, because if I'm able to send my kids to a Christo-fascist training camp, which they should, you know what I mean? Who's not whose job is it, but who can say that I shouldn't be able to do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to teach your kids,
the thing is, though, I don't want communist training camps. So, physical removal, that's not allowed in my community. You have a group of parents who want to send their kid to the communist training. No. You're ostracized everywhere. You're out of this community. But then again, I still wouldn't even want to, I would want to use my helicopters to destroy the communist training camps, right? That's not necessarily libertarian, right?
No, not necessarily. If you had like a pedophile training camp, then some people
I think,
what if you go off and have and people start a pedophile town? It's like, just bomb them. There's no problem with doing that.
I'm sure 99% of the people will be like, yeah, we have no problem doing that. And now we've probably caught strikes on YouTube. Probably because we're talking about I'm not, you know what, I don't mind anymore because I watch a lot of podcasts where they self-censor themselves because they're worried about that, which I understand. You do want your show to be available on like a platform like YouTube, but if you know that you're not monetized, if you know that you're not going to make any money, then you should really talk about whatever you want to talk about. The problem then comes in is if you get strikes and then you have your channel removed. Yeah, you can still talk about what you want to talk about, but not on the largest platform in the world. That's what kind of sucks. But yeah, Ben, thank you for coming on. Prax Ben, I'm going to give you a book.
Awesome.
Cool. Where can people follow you? Where can they find you?
Prax Ben on all platforms except Instagram is prax.ben, because some retard took Prax Ben before I could harass them. No, don't do that.
Don't do that.
Don't do that.
No, your camera's over here. Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that.
I'll put your links in the description. But is there do you have a YouTube channel?
I do have a YouTube channel. I post on there occasionally.
Okay, I'll put that in
some
there.
people might be interested to check out, to hear more about like what we're talking about. I posted a video which is a critique of John Doyle, because John Doyle gave his critique of libertarianism, and then I critiqued John Doyle, and I talked a lot about individualism and misconceptions of individualism. And
sure.
Stuff like
would you ever come on and have a debate with John Doyle?
For sure.
Yeah. You hear that, John? You come on the show. You sit next to Ben. There's room for you on the couch over here. And yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, actually, I was just with John Doyle a few weeks ago. We were at the Austin Capitol. It was just kind of a coincidence because I had a friend working in the Austin Capitol, and then another friend of mine who works for PragerU. He was down there for an event, and I was down there for our separate event.
Oh, great.
And all three of us kind of came together, and then John Doyle shows up, and we're like...
Did you guys talk at all?
It was a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. Well, great. Well, maybe we'll try.
Me
to
and
work
John Doyle have
in
had like some beef a bit.
Yeah.
But also like I think overall we're cool. I definitely have respect for John Doyle. He was someone I listened to a lot when I got into politics.
Okay.
John Doyle, I definitely have respect for you. I know we have beef. I know I've said I called you gay. Like,
we don't do the beefs here. We don't do them here.
Yeah, but I fundamentally have respect for John Doyle as a person.
Well, that's nice. Sure. That's nice to say. And I'm sure maybe we can arrange something. We can have him on, and you guys can talk more about like paleoconservatism versus libertarianism. Because I am probably not the best representation of, let's say, paleoconservatism, because I'm not a smart guy. I just enjoy talking about these things. But thank you, Ben. Thank you for coming on. We really appreciate it. So let me give you a book now.